Good afternoon, everybody. It's late Friday afternoon. Want to get this video to you quickly to prepare for our time around the family table, the Lord's table, this coming Sunday at 10 o'clock. So we'll all be gathering together for the first time since February of last year for our community Lord's meal, where we'll meet in basically two parts: a meal together, the Lord's meal, where everyone will make your contributions, and then will, in the middle of that, also share the bread and the cup. The whole thing is the Lord's meal, has the powerful symbols there in the midst of it as we meet as a family, families around the table. So glad that we can do that, especially as we're right in the middle of this study of belonging to a family, of families. Um, the way the church gathers in this way is directly connected with that first principle that we've been looking at in this study right now that we're currently in. So we'll be talking about session 4 and the study of the scriptures section there. So I'll give you a little bit of orientation to that. But again, 10 o'clock, we'll all meet together. There'll be no Zoom at noon this week because we're all together. And so you should have gotten an aluminum pan and bring your contributions there. And it's a love meal where we appreciate all the concern and care you take in providing for everybody else's nourishment and enjoyment of that. So we'll look forward to that. And feel free to invite guests and friends. It's always a great place to introduce them to the Jesus we love and follow and his family. So encourage you to do that. And we have some very important things to talk about as well. So I encourage you all, please make it a priority to be there. And we haven't done this, as I said, since last February. And want to have everybody there who's part of the Grace Church family, whether you're an official member or a longtime regular that is moving towards that official membership. We can talk more about that as well. But let me take you to the orientation for today. And also remember, as I'm going to this, to bring your baby bottles with the change for Lighthouse Pregnancy Resource Center. We're going to be collecting those finally this Sunday. So Larry and Doris have put that out this past week, so please make sure you bring that. I just got off literally minutes ago a Zoom call, the second of today. I was on a 4-hour call this morning with leaders from around the world, including some of our Albania team. What we're calling executive education. We're learning how to introduce the ideas of the way of Christ and the apostles to leaders of networks of churches and others who have opportunity to influence and develop these ideas and taking tools like first principles into their churches. So I was just on a call with leaders from around North America. You got Philadelphia represented there, Little Rock, Arkansas, Chattanooga, Atlanta, and Matt Anderson is there next to me, who I'm working with in Newark and Patterson in particular, in the initiative that we're working in here in northern New Jersey. So continue to pray for these things. We want this to multiply down into other leaders and across whole networks of churches. And so we're learning how to wrestle with these ideas together in the way of Christ and the apostles, particularly through a set of writings called the encyclicals, or basically circular letters that are meant to help leaders in a network or across networks of churches understand the nuts and bolts of the story of the New Testament and how the mission of Jesus unfolded in the early church. So we were talking this day about the idea that the Gospels, the stories about Jesus, were written after the churches were initially founded. And the 4 Gospels, even though they're in the front of our New Testament, they actually should be towards the end of our New Testament if you were to put them in the order they were written in. And that's important because what the writers of the Gospels were doing, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were looking back at the things that Jesus had taught and done in order for the churches to understand that they were now part of this family and they were part of this movement in the world. This is exactly what Jesus had intended to do. So after these churches are started and with all the challenges that they face that you read about in the book of Acts and through Paul's letters and the letters of the apostles, like Peter we've studied recently, the gospel writers go back and say, stay in there, be encouraged, be strengthened. Know these things because this is you are exactly where Jesus wanted you to be. This is Jesus's plan. You're part of it. And so that's what the Gospels, the four Gospels, the documents we have in the New Testament are doing. So we were talking about that and the implications that they have for how we use those documents in our churches today, and what happens if we use them inappropriately and not according to their attention. And there's huge implications for that. So in general, be praying for these. This is the first Friday of every month. I'm on with these folks in the afternoon, and then with the international leaders in the morning. So first Friday of each month is 8 hours on Zoom. So we'll finish up with you here through this video. We are looking at session 4, living within a family of families. Titus 2:1-15 is the passage we have in front of us this coming Sunday. So please read that. Titus 2:1-15. Why is it there? What's Paul saying to Titus? Why has he written it there? What are the first principles there that the big ideas that we need to pull out of it in general in order to shape our lives and our work together today around those things. So again, that's what we're wanting to, the first questions we're wanting to ask about each one of these passages on Sunday is, what is it doing here in our New Testament? What is it there for? What's it saying? And then in our cohorts on Monday night and Thursday night on Zoom, we think through, okay, well then what are the implications of that for us today? What should we do about those things? What are the significance that it plays for us? Doesn't mean anything different for us. Its significance for us may be different because of the time that we live in, but we need to draw on the same first principle that was being communicated to the churches then. It's also for us today. That's the idea. So that's just where we're going to go this coming week, and you have that in your booklets. Those of you who have the study book. But just quickly, where have we come from? To summarize what we looked at 3 weeks ago, that the church is the centerpiece of Christ's plan. It is the center of Christ's plan for his era. It was previously unrevealed, but is revealed in detail through Paul and the apostles. The cornerstone of the church is Christ. The foundation was laid by the apostles and prophets and is now being built into a worldwide community or global family of believers, both Jews and Gentiles. That's a summary of what we draw from Ephesians 2:11 to 3:18. Secondly, a couple weeks ago, we looked at the church as a family of families. Each church is a family, an extended household made up of families, individual household, so a household of households. 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, those 3 letters from Paul in the New Testament, give the household rules for how each local church, which is a family of families, is to live in community together under Christ's plan or his administration for the church. That's the plan Paul was revealing. So that's really the purpose of those 3 letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Paul's revealing finally and fully to his 2 key men, Titus and Timothy, who are out there trying to order and establish and strengthen the churches, the things that they need to pass on to them in order to make them, to bring them, to shape them according to Christ's plan. That's a way of summarizing what we have there in 1 Timothy 3:14-16, which applies to all 3 of those letters. A summary of what we did last week in Ephesians 5:16 to 9, actually 5:22-6:9. Sorry about that. Special instructions are given to families and how they are to live within the church family. Husbands are to love their wives, and wives are to submit to their husband's leadership. Parents are to train their children in the Lord, with fathers taking care not to be harsh with their children, and children to obey their parents. Masters could be also thought of as employers today, are to treat their servants with respect. Servants are to serve their masters as if they were serving the Lord. These are called household texts. So we were looking at a household text that has to do with an individual household last week. And the main point there is that the household is to be ordered. God has a design for the household. And in later studies, we'll get into the specifics of these particular people and their relationships. But right now, the idea is that the church is to be a family of families, and each individual family, as the basic unit of the church, has a set of guidelines and instructions on how they're to order their lives and their relationships with one another in order for the church to be a strong family. So those two things go very, very closely together. Um, we can't just think about the church or our lives as individuals in whatever way we want to and organize our churches and our families in any way we want to. God has a design for human community, and that's been made possible and laid in front of us now in the person and the work of Christ and the instructions that he gave to the apostles for the creation of these communities and the family of families through every generation until he comes. So these are still authoritative texts because they were given once for all. This is part of the faith that was once for all delivered to us. It's not just a set of ideas, but it's a way of life in every generation, in each and every culture. So again, we're just looking in series one, um, really trying to get our understanding of what it means to follow Jesus into this new community, and that's where we're going right now. So let me move over then to um, the passage itself, which I can just walk you through quickly. And so when we look at Titus 2, um, just be mindful of a couple things as you read it, that Titus 2 itself is a household text. It's not written to an individual household, but it's written to the larger household. So here, if you think about the church as a household of households or an extended family, Paul's writing to the extended family by writing to Titus. So you can see here, as he starts this chapter, what he's doing. As for you, Titus, promote the kind of living that reflects wholesome teaching, sound doctrine, sound teaching, healthy teaching, everything that the church needs. Promote that in order to be the kind of family that God's designed it to be. So that's how Paul starts this chapter, and then immediately begins to talk about the roles and responsibilities of different people in that larger household. So you can see older men, older women, younger women, younger men. There's the young men there. Titus himself is supposed to live in a particular way as the one who's giving this teaching and instruction to the churches. They're slaves and masters again. And then he goes into talk about how all this is tied in with the gospel message itself. One of the most clear and concise declarations of the good news you have right here in verse 11 through 14. This is what Jesus came to do. Why should people live this way? Because this is what God has done. This is the gift that God has given us in the gospel. It's not just about knowing where we go when we die. It's about now living, being able to live now in this kind of life, in this family, until Jesus comes or we go to be with him. So there's a much more powerful, immediate effect of the gospel than just what happens to us in the future. That's a very important point to recognize and to realize. And the way we look forward to that, the way we live for the reality of that day, our hope when either we pass into Jesus' presence or he comes and makes all things new and us with it, should be reflected in the way we live today. And one of the ways it will look like is in these relationships that he's just talked about up above. So keep that in mind as you think about it and think about the specifics. If you wonder whether or not this is supposed to be true for everyone, you must teach these things and encourage the believers to do them. You have the authority to correct them when necessary. Don't let anyone disregard what you say. The role of a leader like a Titus or a Timothy or a Paul himself does not come from who they are, their own training, their background, their academic degrees, anything like that. It comes by way of the teaching they carry and what that teaching is intended to create. This teaching is intended to create an ordered family of families. That's what makes it authoritative, and that's what that determines how and what leaders are supposed to do with it. Why do we need teaching and correction and discipline sometimes in the church? Because these things that are being taught are authoritative. They come from Jesus himself. It was Paul's job to reveal them, and it was the job of Paul and his co-workers and anyone who does that kind of work today, myself included, among others, uh, these things are to be taught and implemented. And that's true of any of the first principles for those who are leaders in a network of churches or across churches, or even leaders in particularly focus on a local church. And remember, there's always two kinds of leaders. Titus is not the pastor of the church that he's working with. He is doing the work of Paul, establishing them, giving them shape, and trying to raise up leaders who are there locally, elders and deacons and leading women, who will keep the church on track. And matter of fact, we know from Titus that he's working across a number of cities on the island of Crete. Titus is in Ephesus in the letters that he receives from Paul. But their job was to do what Paul would be doing if he was there, because of the authoritative teaching that they received. So there's a lot going on in this passage. Hopefully that helps you get a little bit of the background of it. And I hope you'll just take time to reflect and meditate on it. And you do have some questions here, and let me just finish with that in what you'll be seeing on Sunday. So we'll be talking about this, and again, session 4, living within a family. Families, as mentioned in the previous session, when we looked at last week in the Times of the Early Church, there was a type of literature called household texts. These texts fall into two types: individual household texts about an individual family living in an individual home, and larger household texts for communities. In the last session, we focused on individual household texts. This session will focus on household texts that are designed for communities, whole local churches, or networks of simple churches or house churches, which the way we would think about them. The pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, deal with household guidelines for a local church household, a family of families. The community households texts deal with the ordering of relationships within community life, using a similar style as the individual family household text. So they're apples and apples here, but they're just working at a different level, a little bit broader in scope in the number of people that it addresses. Rather than addressing wives, husbands, etc., they address the parts of the community: elders, deacons, older men, older women, younger women, widows, etc. One of the most basic passages within these community household texts is Titus 2, which we'll study in these sections. Probably one of the most obvious examples in Paul's writing, and very clear to see. So just be on the lookout for that, and don't get too bogged down in the details, but just try to note what's going on in general there. What we're going to do is ask these 3 questions on Sunday when we get together. So begin to formulate your ideas, and I encourage you to jot them down. When you have to write things down, you have to focus. Things have to become clear in your mind, and you'll be able to communicate them clearly and get more and more clear on them. So that's the value of taking this step seriously, of doing your own work prior to coming together. So what are the household guidelines for older men, older women, younger men? Tap them out on a note on your phone, or someplace that you have it with you, and you can continue to go back to it and think about it and just keep working on it. You may not be able to have the time to sit down and work on it at one time, but use the tools that are available to you to do that. Somebody will sit down with a computer or a pad of paper and write things out, whatever works best for you, but don't lose any of the ideas, and don't allow your thinking to go unformed by not focusing on and trying to get at what this passage is saying. That's a job each one of us has to do. That's not the job of anyone to do that for you. That's a job that each one of us has to do in handling this word with confidence. What does this tell you about how God has structured the community life of his local churches? Very simply, when reading this passage, how would you respond to that question? We'll talk about that on Sunday. What do these community guidelines have to do with the effectiveness of a local church's witness in the world? What are we talking about there? What do we mean by effectiveness? And what's the outcome that these things are looking forward to? And why those outcomes? And do we really understand that this outcome is directly dependent upon these particular things? So keep that in mind. as a set of first principles that we get have from this passage. So with that, I'll wrap up and look forward to seeing you on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Again, we'll be gathering in the back for our Lord's meal. For those of you who are able, we're going to have set up for that time tomorrow morning, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. for usually takes no more than 2 hours, but an hour may be even what's required, just given the number of people we might have. So we'll get tables set up and everything for in order to be ready for things on Sunday. So that'll be tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. to do setup, and please come and help out with that. There's always something to do there. But then we will get together and bring our love gift of food as we gather around the table on the Sunday in a meal together and a time of discussion together, much in the pattern of which we see in the early church, and that's what the community did, and that's what church was in the early church and in the Bible. So we're following that pattern even when we get all together here, not just in our simple churches, even more so now that we have a full meal together. So the meal is a very, very important part of what we do then, because it was a very important part, if not the central part of what the church was doing in the New Testament. Have a great weekend, and hope you all have a great night and a great Saturday. See you then on Sunday.